speaker is Dr. Azra Raza. She is the Chan Soong Shiong Professor of Medicine and the Director of the MBS Center at Columbia University, New York. Previously, she was the Chief of Hematology Oncology at the Gladys Smith Martin Professor of Oncology at the University of Massachusetts. She is considered an international authority on pre-leukemia and acute leukemia and is one of those rare physician scientists who divide their time equally between caring for patients and supervising a state-of-the-art basic research lab, which is well-funded by multiple large grants. She started collecting blood and marrow samples on her patients in 1984, and now her tissue bank, the largest and oldest in the country with over 60,000 samples, is considered a unique national treasure. She's published her original clinical and basic research comprising over 300 peer-reviewed manuscripts in high-profile journals like Nature, New England Journal of Medicine, Cell, Molecular Cell, Cancer Research, Blood, Leukemia. She has published over 1,000 abstracts, dozens of book chapters, and an edited book devoted to MDS. She is a sought-after speaker in scientific circles and the recipient of numerous awards, including the Hope Award for Cancer Research in 2012. She was named as one of the 100 Women Who Matter by Newsweek Pakistan and is a member of the founder group designing breakthrough developments in science and technology with President Bill Clinton, and met with Vice President Joe Biden to discuss the Cancer Moonshoot Initiative at his residence in Naval Observatory in 2015. She's also the author of The First Cell and The Human Cost of Pursuing Cancer's Last, which was published last month. In addition to her scientific accomplishments, she is a dedicated reader of Urdu literature and the co-author of Ghalib, Epistemologies of Elegance. She believes that the best way to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world is by promoting and publicizing the achievements of humanity in science, art, and literature. She was married to the late Harvey B. Friesler, director of the Rush University Cancer Center in Chicago, and has a Dr. Azra Raza Friesler, who also lives in New York. Dr. Raza.
Thank you very much, Salar. Thank you, Shamaila. Thank you, Nasir. And thank you to the board of directors for the foundation. Thank you to all the students for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. And thank you to Her Excellency, Ms. Aisha Ali. Thank you for being here. I'm duly honored to have a chance to speak to the young people, and mentorship is something that we do on a daily basis because I am attached, of course, to Columbia University and forever surrounded by wonderful, energetic young people. I thought I'll begin by telling you a little personal story. My mother came from Aligarh, and when she was growing up in the 1920s and 30s of Aligarh, it was not considered something worthwhile for women to be taught how to read and write. But the women in the house, my grandmother was able to smuggle a Christian missionary lady into the house, and all the girls were secretly made literate. At 9 years of age, my mother happened to be sent on a vacation to the next town, and she was very unhappy. So she wrote a letter to her mother that please send my father to pick me up. Father came and picked her up, but he was aghast at the fact that his daughter could write a letter. And he demanded to know from my grandmother, how did she learn? And why are you doing this? So my grandmother said, well, it's a good thing for the girls to learn to read and write. And he said, why? So they can go and shake hands with men now? This was the attitude of my grandparents in India. One generation later, that is my daughter now, Scheherazade, was 8 years old. We were driving somewhere and I just happened to ask her, Sheher, what if you win a lottery and suddenly have $100 million? What are you going to do? And this child, without blinking an eyelid, said, finish my education, of course. And I was so affected by this answer that to her the most natural thing, even having piles and piles of money, was to finish my education, of course. Look at the difference between Just the two generations of my mother and my daughter at the Attitude. But what is education and why is it so important? Is imparting more information to the young people the right thing to do, or is there something more that is needed? That is the question that I would like to address now. What is it that's needed to become truly a successful individual who's happy and at peace with themselves first, then their family, then their community, their society, and the world at large? What is it that's needed? And to answer that question, I want to remind you that in pre-Islamic Arabia, there was a custom that at least people who could afford it, the noblemen, would send the male children to be raised in the desert by wet nurses. Why? Because they felt that in order to survive in life, the most important thing is building character. You basically weed out the weak ones, because now the child has to face the stark forces of nature, the sandstorms, the desert's heat, the kind of grueling nights and days that you have to spend sometimes without water for days. And you have to really be, and it turns out that the 4 critical skills that you needed in pre-Islamic Arabia are practically the same 4 skills that are needed today that we try to impart to our children by sending them to the equivalent of desert upbringing. We send them to boarding schools. And what are those 4 skills that we want them to learn? I'm sure many of you have read all the books, but at least you know the name of Yuval Noah Harari, my favorite writer right now. Sapiens, Homo Deus, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, etc. He boiled it down to the 4 skills that I always talk about also, which is communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And I can give you an hour's lecture on each of these, but because we have just a few minutes, I'll just talk about one thing, which is creativity, because young people are in the room. And I want to make sure you fully understand, without being intimidated, by what is meant when we say creativity. One of the best studies I came across about creativity is by an Israeli group of scientists, absolutely brilliant. They wanted to look at the root of creativity. So what they did was an experiment that's absolutely unique. They gave the same task to humans and computers, and then asked other unrelated individuals to judge which answer was better. And the task that they gave was, I'll give you 3 short examples. One, they said, make an advertisement for a Jeep which is noiseless. So the humans came up with the advertisement in which the mother is turning and yelling at her children sitting in the car, turning to the back seat and saying, guys, this Jeep is so noiseless, I can even hear your hiccup and you guys are screaming at the top of your lungs. Something like that. What did the computer come up with? 2 Jeeps are going in the desert talking in sign language. Then the second task that was given was, this airline is always on time. So humans came up with an advertisement in which parents are dragging their children across the airport and saying, run, we're going to miss the flight. The computer, what did that come up with? There's a cuckoo clock. Suddenly it opens, and instead of the cuckoo coming out to announce the time, it's an airplane coming out of the clock. And the third example to me was the best. there was going to be an international tennis tournament in Jerusalem. And the humans came up with an announcement for the international tennis tournament pasted on the Wailing Wall. But what did the computer come up with? The dome of the rock has the texture of a tennis ball. And when these examples, humans and computers, were given for judgment to individuals, every single time, hands down, the computer won. How is it that the computer was so much more creative than humans? What exactly did they do? So this is why the root of creativity is traced back to these two things, which I want to tattoo on the young people's cerebrums today. The first rule is there is no cutting corners. You have to know everything about the problem that you are going to be addressing, or any issue. In fact, Einstein said something beautiful. He said, if I'm given 1 hour to solve a problem, I will spend 55 minutes trying to define the problem, 5 minutes to solve it. Defining the problem means you need to know everything about it, which means knowledge is the most important thing. And that's what the algorithm for the computer was, just this, that you needed to feed it all the information, say, about Jerusalem, why is it famous, the Dome of the Rock, etc., etc. But then the thing that really made the computer so much more creative. So remember, Louis Pasteur said something like, chance or luck strikes a prepared mind. Your mind has to be fully prepared first to receive that creativity. And then what you have to do is a very simple formula that was put into the computer in the form of an algorithm, and which made the computer so far superior in coming up with creative ideas. And what was put in is what I am obsessed by in my real life after science, which is poetry. All of poetry rests on a single algorithm, which is metaphor. What is a metaphor? It's the ability to find likeness in two seemingly unrelated things. That's it. It's different than a simile. A metaphor is, for example, you'll say something like a white blanket of snow. How is snow a blanket? But immediately you have a graphic image of a white blanket of snow. Or one of the most gorgeous lines by Emily Dickinson. My life had stood a loaded gun in corners till a day. My life had stood a loaded gun in corners till a day. The owner came, identified, and carried me away. Why is that loaded gun so important? You see, because I often think of this poem when I'm dealing with my patients on a respirator. The body that is connected to a ventilator is a loaded gun. It is the only thing that is capable of dying or living. Yet the trigger cannot be pulled by that body. The owner passed, identified, and carried me away. The agency doesn't belong to that. So that's how the loaded gun analogy becomes so important, the metaphor. What I'm trying to say is you need to have the knowledge, but then knowledge alone, information alone is never enough for creativity. You need something more. You need to have imagination to not let your imagination march to marvels, but confine it in that space within the information that you have gained. So I feel that the character that our ancestors wanted to build and the character we want our children to build is exactly this. No one can predict what life is going to be like 30 years from now. No one can predict. not just the climate, but the way technology is evolving so rapidly. I was in a conference recently, 15 of us were closeted on a farm for 3 days, debating cybernetics. The head of the MIT Media Lab, this one, that one, 2 Nobel laureates, 3 people halfway to getting their Nobel laureates, all kinds of big minds were there. And of course, we didn't agree on anything. We were all debating this concept of cybernetics, but the only thing we agreed on was this, that our great-grandchildren will not be humans like us. That is the one thing we agreed on. And there are many reasons to go into it, but what I'm trying to say is because we can't predict what the world will be like in 20 and 30 years, how do we prepare our children to face that world when it's unpredictable? The only thing we can do is make them so strong that they're able to adjust to the changing reality. And in order to do that, information is not enough. What you need is to build character. How do you build character? You need to have confidence, a sense of security, and a sense of moral high ground. Because if you are standing on your principles on a moral high ground, no one can challenge you then. So do things with sincerity. Don't try to cut corners. And that is the secret of success. Is work as hard as you can. I don't come from a family where I was told, honey, you can become whatever you want. No, you have to work very, 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 very hard, then we'll see. Study as hard as you can and keep trying to increase your knowledge base, but then never forget that you will need, in addition to Jerusalem, in addition to Athens, you need Jerusalem. So what is Athens and Jerusalem? Of course, it's reason and passion. Reason alone will not get you anywhere. You need to combine the two. And thankfully, the culture that I have come from, there is no such artificial separation of reason and passion because they're seamlessly joined together through our poets, our Sufi thinkers, our philosophers, our guides, so to say. And I'll just end now by telling you one little incident. A family friend, Mr. Kashmiri, talked to my younger brother Abbas one day and said, Abbas, if the sun rises from the west today, suddenly, everybody is going to stop and stare at it. Because it's obviously the sun shouldn't be rising from the west. But he said, but then there are a few people who see the sun rise in the east every day and wonder why. And they are the people who really can change the world. So don't take anything for granted. Question everything. Be curious about things. And then I will end with a beautiful verse from one of my favorite writers, Alfred Lord Tennyson. The lights begin to twinkle on the rocks. The long day wanes, the slow moon rises, the deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, it's not too late to seek a newer world, for my purpose still holds to sail beyond all the stars of western sky until I die. It may be we shall touch the happy isles. It may be we shall see the great Achilles whom we knew. And though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that force which in olden days moved heaven and earth, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Thank you.